Hello and welcome back to the Dicebreaker podcast, and Happy New Year! It's 2021.
That was me blowing an imaginary
Yay!
party blower thing.
Yay!
I guess it's a reason to celebrate.
It's not 2020 anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's not 2020 also. It feels like just a continuation at some point. But
I'll tell you what it is, though, Matt. It's episode 40.
It is episode 40, which is 2020 added together. So in some ways, it's just off the mark.
That's
Well
It's
done,
time for the
episode 40.
podcast's midlife crisis. We're all going to buy a big fancy car that we can't afford, and we're going to take up tennis or something. I don't know.
Yeah, gonna buy a ride in Dalek on eBay.
I can't afford any of those things, so you know.
Not even a ride in Dalek.
Potentially depends.
Aren't all
where I get it
Daleks
from.
ride in Daleks?
I mean, I guess so. In universe, they're all
Canonically.
I
That
mean,
really tickled me.
you could sit on top of a Dalek, right? Like
Yeah,
it
it's
could
a
be a
ride
ride
on
on Dalek. Yeah.
Oh, now I'm.
Haven't even done the
imagining-
intros yet. We're already in.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we are. I've got the episode title already.
Canonically ride in Dalek.
We are here, of course, back with a brand new year of games, which haven't come out yet, so we can't talk about those. But what we can talk about are the games that we might have played over the break, and the games we're looking forward to coming up. Board games, RPGs, all sorts of stuff. What is on the tabletop? So let's kick off. Of course, I haven't even introduced us because I've been so excited to get back into the podcast. But I'm Matt Jarvis. I'm of course joined by two of the team this week. Joined by Michael Wheels, Wheel and Wheels. Hello,
Michael
Wheels,
Wheels,
how are
Wheel and
you?
Wheels here, wheeling along at the speed of wheels.
New year, new name. Just going to add wheels every time. It's like Roman numerals.
Yeah, I'm part of the video team, of course, and I have actually played some board games. I am very, very excited to announce.
All it took was like 2 weeks of holiday
Yeah.
to play some games.
Ooh.
And of course, we're joined by Alex Meehan.
Hey.
Back with a half side to side look.
Yeah. I'm trying to mix it up. Yeah. If Wheels is out on the streets, I'm in the chopper. Or on the chopper, maybe.
You are
Right
Chopper.
on Chopper.
Chopper the droid.
I'm not Chopper the droid, but maybe I'm sat on top of Chopper as he's driving around.
Ride on Chopper the droid.
Yeah.
Throwback to 2020's greatest hero, Chopper the Droid.
Yeah. Chopper the droid. Bring it
The
back.
only hero from 2020. Someone-
Sorry, Dolly Parton. What about Chopper the droid now?
Oh, Dolly Parton's been a hero every other year. It's time she gave somebody else a spotlight.
Yeah, maybe they could do a variety show together. I'd watch it.
Chopper, 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 chopper.
And all Chopper does is just like ride around, just slinging out one-liners. Anyway,
All right.
Well,
Anyway, yeah, we're here to chat about board games and some other stuff. So let's jump back to you. What did you manage to play over the holidays?
okay. Right, hold on. I need to Google something.
whoa, we're doing some research live on air right now. It's wild.
Okay, apparently it's pronounced Nefertafel.
Oh, right, yeah.
I have been playing Nefertafel, which is a game that predates chess and was commonly played by Vikings, apparently. But it was a gift from my brother because he, quote, said, you know about every board game that exists right now, but I thought it'd be safer to buy you one that came out like half a century ago, whatever. Half a millennia, whatever it is. Oh, God, I genuinely don't know how long it's been. I think it came out in like the 1400s or something like that.
A good year.
But yeah. Oh, it's a 1600-year-old game. There you go. No,
Wow.
it's a lot,
The
lot
400s.
longer than that. There we go. But it is, yeah, it's chess-like, but it's before chess came into sort of circulation. Quite a while before, probably. But the way it works is you have two players, one black, one white. Much like chess, you play on a, I think it's like 16 by 16 or something like, or 8 by 8 or whatever it is, square board, much like chess. However, instead of having two sides where each of the armies are facing each other. This is asymmetric, which is quite exciting, which is not something that you really see in very, very old games all that often. You have what's known as the attackers in black and the defenders in white. And the way the board is set up, you have your white players have one piece called the king, and then they have about 12 sort of standard pieces. And then the attackers have no king, but they have 24 pieces. And
Whoa.
the defenders are stuck in the center, and the attackers are sort of lining the outside of the board. So the goal for the black team, or the attackers, is to capture the king, and the goal for the white team is for the king to escape via one of the four corners of the board. Every piece moves in the same way, in like a sort of like a rook would in chess. It can move any amount of spaces sort of orthogonally without jumping over another piece. And you capture by sort of sandwiching pieces. So if you have if you're playing with the black team, you want to make an Oreo out of them by having black on each side of a white piece, sort of like in a line rather than in a right angle. And that way you can capture them. But to capture the king, you have to have every single exit for them blocked. So it's really, really interesting because it's sort of... So I was playing it with my partner, and we were sort of like very sheepishly moving pieces. Because you can swing all the way across the board of any piece, especially as the black team, that you have so much range of movement, which means that like you really have to think about where your pieces are going. So you end up sort of moving in twos almost. Sort of like everyone has to have a buddy, otherwise they get completely surrounded. And it has a lot more sort of like battle line tactics than chess does. So I feel like with chess it's always sort of like, because there's so many different movement patterns, it's all a bit abstract of what's going on, whereas this felt more like I'm moving a unit of men around, and sometimes they'll charge out and try and get a swing in and stuff like that, but it's like very very much more like a traditional battle taking place than the more abstract chess, I think. And it's really cool. It's really interesting. I enjoyed it a lot more because I don't like chess. But yeah, it was really interesting. I don't know if you guys have heard of it before.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I've not really played it very much at all. It's always seemed interesting, like you say, because it's because it's so old, and B because it's asymmetrical and dates from way back when. It's just it's a fascinating thing. I think they keep finding sets, don't they?
Yeah. Also,
Nefertafel?
Nefertafel,
sorry.
It sounds like the name of one of Santa's elves or something.
It's like
a Care Bear or something.
The thing is with it is like the rules. Like we had every now and again we'd be like, is that how that works? Because the rule, obviously the box came with a rule set, but it's very much like this is what we think the rules are because we don't really know. And also there's so many variants because it's such an old game. It's split into different parts of the world, and people would play it in a different way to somebody 2 countries away from them. So it's like it's tricky to try and solve a rules dispute if you're not entirely sure on how something works. But it is like you can learn it in like a couple of minutes. Like it's really really fluid. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's really cool. So there you go. That's Nefertafel, which is spelt because I very much doubt anyone would be able to guess by what I'm saying unless they're from a Scandinavian country maybe. But it's HnefAtafl. So when I got the box, I tried to read it. It was a struggle. But apparently it's pronounced Nefertafel. The other thing I played... well, I should also say, actually, whilst we're talking about classic games, I also bought a Go board over the break, which I'm planning to learn with my partner again, because they really like abstract games. So I thought we might as well, because I wasn't expecting that much game time out of Nefertafel, because I thought it would be too chess-like. But actually, they were like, "Oh, I really like this." I was like, "Okay, let's have a look at some of the others then." So I bought a Go board. I think Go boards are really pretty anyway, so they're good to have in the house. But I also played an RPG. I played Gumshoe 1-to-1. Which is a variant of Gumshoe, which, for those who don't know, is like a sort of RPG detective, sort of like procedural crime drama style game, where you have a group of investigators. It could be, it's a settingless system, so it depends on what book you play. So you could be like Cthulhu investigators, you could be spies, you could be all sorts. But Gumshoe itself is sort of a system that was made by someone who played, like D&D and stuff, and tried to tell detective stories and realized that they just don't really work. So it's very much a system that is built from the ground up to be able to, investigate crime scenes and have that be like the main thoroughfare of the play. So we're running a game of Gumshoe 1-to-1, or I'm running one at the moment, but I think we're going to sort of swap duties. But this one is specifically designed for one GM and one player. We essentially started playing this because I finished Disco Elysium, and now we have this massive Disco Elysium shaped hole in our lives. So we're essentially I'm running a campaign of Gumshoe 1-to-1 in the Disco Elysium universe, with like sort of new characters and like in the Jamrot district and all that kind of stuff, which is quite fun and quite exciting. But that is what I have played this Christmas.
Nice. I love Gumshoe.
Gumshoe's great.
Yeah, it's just such a slick system. Like, it's 1d6. Just so easy.
But it's also like, I think the main thing I love about it is that you don't have to pass a perception check every time you're looking at stuff and whatever. It's just, if you go somewhere and they look at something, they'll know what it is. But if they have a relevant skill, then they'll know the actual details about it. And then you can spend a point in that skill, or in this case, for 1-to-1, they're kind of like catch-all points, called push points, so you can spend them on anything. But with this, you spend a point and you get an extra bit of information that only you would have gotten by pushing. So you kind of like voluntarily critically succeed, which is quite cool.
Yeah,
so it's like a lot more like resource management almost.
Yeah, it feels like a very positive system because, like you say, it's almost like yes, because it's like, okay, of course you can do that. You can read Greek, so you can just read Greek. You don't need to roll for it, and then you get extra stuff rather than just being like, well, I rolled poorly, even though my character should really know this.
Yeah,
it just feels
It basically certifies that every time you leave a piece of the sort of like, one of the locations where things are, you will always have the bare minimum amount of evidence that you need to solve it. So like there is extra information that you can grab, but you'll always have the minimum, which will help you like get to the end bit and sort of figure out the whodunit, which is very cool. That's what I've been playing.
Would you like to very briefly explain to the listeners, Mr. Whelan, what Disco Elysium is and how, and how that's sort of translated into Gumshoe?
Yeah, Disco Elysium is, I'm going to say it, one of the best RPGs ever written. It is honestly one of the best video games I've ever played. It is a detective-style RPG in which you're playing in a sort of original universe and you're solving a crime. The character that you're playing is also a complete mess, so you're trying to have to sort of deal with that as you play. And it's funny and it's poignant and it's like a big think piece. It's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. And we loved it so much because I played it with my partner as sort of like a tandem playthrough. We loved it so much that we just couldn't get enough and needed to fill that hole. So we're just sort of playing in the same universe, but essentially, and reading a lot of Wikipedias.
That game system is based off percentages, is it not? Like whether you can hit certain percentage, you can get this response that you want from the person. So I'd be interested to think how that works with the Gumshoe.
Well, so I've not sort of written any new mechanics for it or anything like that. We're just sort of we're just basing it in the world, just because it was quite a cool world to inhabit. One thing that I think it does really well is that because it's its own universe, it can have all of the cool things that you like with detective stories without having to be mired in a specific time period to avoid stuff like DNA and fingerprints and stuff like that. Because I think when you reach a certain threshold of real world sort of like crime stuff, eventually it becomes a lot more, we have actual DNA evidence that you did this, rather than trying to work out a puzzle, which is more like the sort of Sherlocky kind of detective style. So it manages to sort of like sit between those two worlds quite comfortably and have its own sort of version of where the world is at technology wise. So you've got like cameras, but they're rare, and you've got motor vehicles, but they're big and a bit crap. Like it's having your cake and eating it too in the detective world sort of thing. But yeah, the system in Disco Elysium is really interesting. It's got like, I think it's got like 16 skills, but rather than them all be like persuasion, agility, punching, they're all basically, apart from like a few, they are pretty much all conversational. So you've got things like motorics, which is like, how good are you using your hands, or you've got like physical instrument, which is like how much can you just like absurd force into the world. But then you've also got savoir faire and like esprit de corps and like your persuasions and logic skills are split into like 6 different things. So you've got like visual calculus and logic and Inland Empire is my favorite one that we picked for our signature skill, which is basically like imagination, conceptualization, all that kind of stuff. Like it's really interesting, and because of the way that the sort of dialogue system works, every now and again you're basically always passing dice rolls in the background. So everything is, you roll 2d6 and you add your score and you're looking for a difficulty level, and you'll see those dice rolls actually happen as you attempt things. But those dice rolls are also happening in the background subconsciously, and your brain will talk to you in the voice of the skill. So like if you're working something out, logic will try and talk to you. Or like if you're having a conversation with your partner, sometimes the authority part of your brain will be like, he seems more powerful than you, quick, assert your dominance. And it's like you'll get like all these different personalities inside of you who are like basically just aspects of your personality trying to like show their view of the world. And it does some really, really interesting things with it as well, where there's like a point where you're having a conversation with this kind of like femme fatale figure. And all the voices in your brain are just like, yeah, no, that makes sense, because you can kind of trust them throughout. They've been like, oh, he's not lying. You can tell from his body language and all that kind of stuff. But then after about 75% of the conversation, part of your brain is just like, are you all idiots? You realize that you've just been completely played by this person, right? Because like your volition is taking over. It's really, really cool. It's probably one of the best games I've ever played. As I said, it's fantastic. And it feels probably the most like an actual tabletop RPG as well, just to bring it back around to board games. Like I think it's the most like tabletop-esque video game RPG I've ever played. It really feels like, or at least the kind of ones that I play, it really feels like you're actually given all of the options and allowed to just be a bit weird without breaking things. Like it allows you to push yourself in strange directions to try and poke at things that you don't really understand and see what happens. Whereas I feel like a lot of video games, you get given the options, you're like, I don't know, what's the most boring standard thing that I can say? Yeah, that sounds like the one that will just get me through. Whereas this is like, what if you are just going to act a bit weird? Because it might help, actually. But yeah, it's pretty good.
Nice. All right. Alex, Meehan, what have you been playing?
Oh, what have I been playing? I've been playing chess!
Whoa! Bring it back.
Yeah.
So many traditional games going on.
Full circle.
I know. There's some sort of secret connection here between what Mr. Whelan's been playing, what I've been playing, as he kindly mouthed off earlier against chess. I suppose I'll step in for the game's defense.
I said I don't like it. I never said it was bad.
No. Yeah. So we've come into ownership of 2 chess sets.
Oh my lord.
For some reason, my housemate and I we managed to acquire a chess set at exactly the same time, and so now we have a fancy glass one, and they have a nice wooden one. So we want to try and get one set up, kind of permanently somewhere, but we'll have to find space for it. But I managed to get a few games out, and let's say I'm rusty. I used to be in a chess club.
I'm gonna make glasses at you. I'm doing the thing.
Yeah, whatever. I was cool. In primary school, so it wasn't in secondary school or uni. And I'm pretty sure I've not really played much since then. And that was a while ago, so I kind of had to pick it up again. But I remembered how all the pieces move roughly. I remembered. The knight still baffles me a bit with just trying to remember, okay, how does this work again? Just the way that it looks on the board. It's just such a different piece compared to all the others. But yeah, most of them ended in stalemate. We just get to the point where we remove all usable units, so then we're just left with a king and some pawns or a knight or something like that, and you've kind of gotten to the point where this isn't going to go anywhere really anymore, because the thing with chess is that in order to actually win the game, you need to try and get checkmate, which is very difficult when you're lacking pieces, particularly ones that can move, further than just one space. So yeah, like I enjoy it. I want to get back into playing it a bit more. My flatmate wants to actually like study chess a bit more, because they're like, oh, I just feel really rusty, because we're moving the pieces, we're sort of doing the basic actions, but we're not necessarily gotten to the point where we're actually thinking that far ahead in terms of, oh, if I put this piece here, sure, it's going to be taken by this piece, but that means I've gotten this piece into a better position, which ultimately means I can move towards getting checkmate, because that is the main goal. People forget sometimes, I forget, is the checkmate. See, sometimes you can just get wrapped up in, oh, I just want to take this person's bishop, when really you should be thinking about, I want to get into a position where I can actually execute a checkmate that's going to work, rather than just, oh, they'll get out of it somehow. But yes, chess.
Yeah, this is kind of the thing I don't like about chess, to be honest, because it's very, it does feel like you have to study it to ever really get anywhere with it, because it's almost like every possible chess strategy has basically been made. So if you don't know it, then you just don't know it. It doesn't really feel like I'm making many decisions when I play.
I'm not really playing. It's not like either of us are like chess champions or anything.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know the strategies. We just kind of know how the pieces work, and maybe some rudimentary elements of, oh, like, a lot of it's just baiting. Like, you just have to bait the person to do something, and for them to not realise like what you're trying to get them to do, and like pulling those moves off is incredibly satisfying, because then you're sat there like thinking, oh, I'm such a god right now. I'm so clever. I'm like, my master brain is working 2 steps ahead of you, and all you've managed to do is just like trick them into taking like their rook or something. But it's like baby step, like, from there, who knows where we're going to go. We have 2 chess sets.
Oh my god.
You could play, just put them together, play really long chess.
Or just 2 simultaneous games.
Yeah.
Blindfolded.
Yeah, next thing you know it, I'll be going to Russia, I'll be challenging the champions, everything. Yeah, and I'll have cool hair and really nice costumes. So we've been playing some chess, and we've been playing a new game that I got, Cosmic Encounter Duel. Yeah, which came out last year.
I'm excited to hear about this one.
Yeah, it's a 2-player version of Cosmic Encounter, which is like a fairly well-known board game. It's like one of the kind of bastions of modern board games, although it came out in like the 80s, right?
Yeah, it's been around for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, 77, I think.
There you go, 70s. But it's obviously been revised over that time, and it's definitely, one of those games that I've enjoyed a lot, because it kind of has like a wackiness about it, and depending on the the level of aliens that people play. Like, I believe we talked about it a bit when we were doing our Game of the Year podcast, because you lot were talking about Cosmic Frog, which is similar. But like, the joy of Cosmic Encounter is people playing as different aliens, and those aliens kind of coming together in an odd way, but also people's allying with each other, and things happen that you don't expect to happen sometimes. But obviously with Cosmic Encounter Duel, it's a 2-player game, so you don't have that element of allying with people, and also what alien you're opponent is playing, and they know what alien you're playing. There's no secrecy about it. I'd say it's more of a strategic game rather than the chaos of Cosmic Encounter. Because, like, obviously you can play Cosmic Encounter, you know, somewhat strategically, depending on your ability. You know, you can, like, pick certain players' planets that you think are going to be an easier steal than others and play certain cards at the right time. But I'd say the standard game is more about the, you know, cooperation with other players and the gift of the gab, as it were. But Cosmic Encounter Duel can't do that, so instead it leans more on the strategic element. So we played using the recommended aliens that it suggests for your first game, which are fairly straightforward. Like, they have, you know, sort of very easy to understand abilities, and you play it in a series of stages. So you know, you start off exploring a planet like you would in the normal game, but instead of exploring a planet that a player has, this planet is neutral to start off with. It's just a planet, and so you're fighting over that planet, and so you secretly send a number of spaceships, and then from that point onwards it's quite different, because you go through like a stage of, they call it like tactics and plans. So you have these little standy things that display like different actions that you can do. So like shooting spaceships, or shielding against shots, or like recovering used tactics. And you secretly play one of these things against one another. And that either destroys your enemy spaceships, or your spaceships can get destroyed, or like sometimes neither of those things can happen. And whether like a player's spaceships are destroyed or not, you know, the duel can end right there if you don't have any spaceships left. If it doesn't end there, then it moves on to the plan stage, which is more similar to the normal game, where you play like a card with a number on it, and you win the duel depending on who has, you know, the highest number. And then a player needs to win 5 planets to win the game. So depending on your alien's abilities, sometimes it's better to try and win on the destroy the spaceship stage, or try and win on the plan stage. And you can like gain like reinforcements to try and boost your plan plays, or you can like gain, you know, abilities that help you get your tactics back. Because once you use a tactic, it's used, but you can get it back by like, doing certain actions and things. So like, I think we experienced a very like basic version of it, because we played those basic aliens. So I think if we played some of the more like out there aliens, and there's quite a few included in the game, it's probably a bit more of a rich experience. But to start with, it's good. Like, it's not Cosmic Encounter, but I didn't expect it to be, because it doesn't have the thing that makes Cosmic Encounter good, i.e. all the other players. So there you go.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. Like you say, when I think of Cosmic Encounter, I think of 2 things, which is 1, the aliens break all the rules, and 2, people basically just teaming up to destroy each other or backstab each other.
Yeah.
And so this feels like it goes heavy on the first because it doesn't have the second.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Whelan, please.
Well, I was just going to say that the kind of fun thing about Cosmic is that they don't mind just making stuff that's stupidly overpowered, because it gets balanced by the fact that everyone knows it's stupidly overpowered, and then they all target you, right? So I guess without that sort of ganging up, it must be tricky to sort of figure out how to balance those aliens against each other.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the 2 aliens that we played, which are the basic ones, are like pretty well balanced against one another. So the one that I played was an alien that every time you played a card with a prime number on it, you got a reinforcement. That was it. It was just an alien that really likes prime numbers. And then my opponent's alien was one that... so there's each planet you visit are, the cards determine the aspects of the planet. So, like, that sometimes there are specific situations that the planet card presents that kind of change the way the duel works. And there's also like, oh, the winner gets this thing or the loser gets this thing, and that's kind of where a bit more of the random stupid stuff comes in, because sometimes the winner will get something really ridiculously good or really stupid, or the loser vice versa. And each explore card has like a ship advantage number, and I think that plays into each of some of the aliens' abilities. And so this alien was, whenever they had the ship advantage, which is when they played more ships than the other player, and they still had them, the ship advantage was like doubled for them, but halved for the other player. And sometimes this meant that the opponent, like my opponent, had like double my plan number because they had the ship advantage. But sometimes it didn't really affect much at all because the ship advantage number was so low that it's like, what's the point? So for them, for example, they were better off trying to put all their money into all their efforts into like trying to destroy my ship so they could get the ship advantage. Whereas for me, because I had more reinforcements, it meant I was better putting, more of my efforts into hoping that I can survive the ship phase and get onto the plan, because I could play more reinforcements. Because like by the end of one game, I played 5 reinforcements on top of my plan card simply because I gained them throughout the game because of the stupid prime number thing. So I think there is some wackiness now. We just haven't managed to find it quite yet because we've just been playing the very easy aliens. So I'm sure if we played some of the more complicated ones, then things would get even more stupid. But there you go.
Sounds like they've at least gone the extra measure of thinking through what would work for 2 people rather than just stripping away the rest of the players and trying to have the same game.
Yeah, no, so it wouldn't have. It would never have worked like that. Because, like I said,
I'm always really interested by 2-player versions of standard games because I think like it's almost quite an interesting puzzle to solve to make those things.
Yeah.
I actually really like the Catan 2-player variant. It's actually really good.
Yeah, I would say the components are a little bit I expect more from Fantasy Flight,
Yeah.
And the tactics are like you have to slot them into little standees to get them to stand up, but the standees are cardboard as well, and so sliding them in meant that it sometimes got bent, especially when your housemate has immense muscle and therefore like crushes the tactic things. And so they're just like these little like wonky things you're trying to stand up on a table and they're just falling down. They're too swole. And you get this little standy thing. So there's another thing where you have the straggler and the leader. The leader is basically whoever's winning the game, and the straggler is the other player. And the straggler gets this little token, which is, do you know the loser race from the species from Cosmic Encounter? It's the loser species, like, hanging in a little... It looks almost like they're in a baby bouncer. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like the things you put babies in and they can like... Yeah, it looks like that. But it's all wonky. And I don't know whether that's because we forced it in or whether it's just like not built very well, but it's instead of just being a straight line with the little alien hanging off it, it's just like at an angle. So I would say it's quite a complicated game. It took us a while to get our head around. There's like lots of things that I haven't talked about because we'd be here forever. So there is that, but Cosmic Encounter is a complicated game as well, so it's not it's not like this is completely out of nowhere. So, yeah.
All right. Nice.
Mr. Jarvis, tell us.
Yeah, what about you, Matt?
I played a load of party games over the internet with friends during the holiday, so I played a bit Telestrations, which is very good. Just One, which I'm warming to slowly. I still think it's kind of just fine.
Yeah.
But actually, when we were looking for party games to play, it's so simple that I think that's the benefit of it. Is like we just knocked out 20 rounds and it took us half an hour or 40 minutes. It just filled a gap. Telestrations is obviously still brilliant. It's one of the best party games ever made, and you can just play it using basically whatever you have to hand. And we also played Wavelength a bunch. That was quite good fun. It has now sparked multiple conversations about the sexiest Pokemon, which continues to just be an ongoing debate now in my friendship group.
It's a dangerous place. It's
a round hour just discussing that one category. So, yeah.
Care to give us any examples, or would you rather keep that?
We're all disagreeing on various things. I think there were some votes for Dratini. There were some votes for like Voltor or something. I don't know. Sudowoodo.
Sudowoodo.
Anyway,
wonderful.
My wife and I played War of the Ring, which we hadn't played in a little while.
Bloody hell!
Yeah, crack that out. Because we were watching the 4K versions of the Lord of the Rings extended trilogy. And it's like, well, tell you what, the perfect complement to these very long films is this very long war
As
game.
if they weren't extended enough.
Yeah. So War of the Rings still great though. It really gets the spirit of Lord of the Rings. It's kind of it's not basically, it's kind of Risk, because it's at some point you're just slamming groups of little plastic people together, but I think it does enough with the Fellowship trying to get to Mount Doom and Sauron searching for them and the leaders and stuff, and the events, that it manages to go beyond just rolling a bunch of dice to fight each other.
Is it the case of you have obviously the war element, the units fighting each other, but you've also got this extra element of the journey to Mount Doom and Sauron looking for them, so it's not all just like continuously fighting.
Yeah, and like the fact that you roll dice and then you spend the dice on different, so you can use dice if you're the is it the Free Peoples, the Alliance of Middle-earth, whatever the good
not
the
the
good
orcs
are called. Yeah, not Sauron and Saruman. But you can move the Fellowship, or you can build up reinforcements in the different...
Sauron and Saruman sounds like a legal partnership.
Sauron and Saruman, protecting your interests. We've got our eye on you.
Have you had an accident at Mount Doom?
Can you imagine the courtroom? Just Sauron, just like sat in there.
Were you offered a ring that corrupted your very moral essence and turned you into a walking undead?
I was walking out of my birth sack and fell over and hurt my nose. Sauron and Saruman got me 40 pieces of gold.
Yeah, that's what they can move on to now that they've given up on the whole, conquering thing.
I mean, they're both gone at this point. I mean,
You don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, did you never get to the end of the Lord of the Rings? Like
Yeah, but
they're not in a position to be able to.
Spoilers, Matt. Jeez.
They didn't just retire quite quietly to go set up a legal practice somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Technically, Saruman only dies in the extended version of Two Towers. So if you don't watch the extended version,
he goes off
be
to form a
alive.
legal
He goes off. That's the branching paths, you see.
Yeah. And if you never get to the end of Fellowship of the Ring, Boromir is fine. It's fine. Yeah.
It's Sean Bean. Sean Bean's always fine.
He's one of the ones claiming for, I took 3 arrows to the chest in my place of work. Anyway, War of the Ring's still pretty good. It's still very long. I would say that the rulebook, so we were playing the second edition. The rulebook is kind of just overwrought for what it is. Like it's a complex game, but it's not as complex as the rulebook needs to be.
Yeah.
So we used a very good aid from the Esoteric Order of Gamers, which is a website that kind of boils down rulebooks to.
About this morning.
I was, yeah. Basically, whoever runs it boils down rules for games to just a couple of pages normally. I think they're a graphic designer as well, so they always take elements of the game and make them very kind of visually kind of easy to read, but also pleasing. But using that made it a lot easier to kind of remember all of the rules involved, because, like I say, it's not, when you boil it down, it's you roll some dice, you spend the dice to do actions, and then you smash a load of people together and they fight. It's not super complicated, but going through the rule book made it seem a lot more.
Yeah.
We owned the expansions for it, but we didn't include those because it was enough to pick up the main game again. So we didn't have eagles and ents and so on. But yeah, I still like War of the Ring a lot.
Isn't there a new version of that coming out, or at least
they're bringing out a card game, as Dicebreaker exclusively broke the news of, or broke some details of. Yeah, so there's a card game coming out this year, which I think is why War of the Ring was on my mind, because it had been a while since I'd played. And I am very intrigued to see what they do, because I think the cards are actually among the strongest elements of War of the Ring, because that's where you get all the flavour. Like, it's very good at capturing the spirit of it all. Because the people on a map it's kind of just risk.
The cards are like an OXO cube. That's where all the flavour of the game is, you know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Dissolved in the liquid, the water of... Anyway. The other thing I did, which isn't quite a board game, is with some friends we played some online escape rooms, which were a mixed bag. There was one that was about setting up for a festival, and it came with a soundtrack and sound effects every time you open a web page, and it was very funny, but not deliberately. I'm
imagining what those sound effects are, and I reckon I was pretty close.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And the other one was like a murder. It was like CSI something, not official CSI, but
CSI kind of. Brighton.
I think it was somewhere. It wasn't Brighton, but it was somewhere like that, with just kind of some city somewhere, which was fine. It was better than the rock and roll one. They were both fun, but I think I've done a few escape rooms online now, and they're fun, but it kind of lacks that. We were all in a voice call, and you're just kind of browsing for a website trying to solve puzzles, and a few of them were just kind of very similar. You have to put in this password. Can you find the password somewhere? Yeah. I think there's, when you're lacking like the tangible kind of like putting keys in things or pulling things open or searching around a room.
Was it like, it's hard to get that. You had to find the password behind this like spot the difference picture?
I mean, not a million miles from that, to be honest. There was one where it's like, here's a list of people that worked at the shop, and you just read the list, and instantly it was like, well, the first letters of their names spell a word, and that was the password. It's like, it didn't really take much. But I think, escape rooms are really good fun, and it's a really hard thing to capture when you're not in the same room as other people. It's a tricky thing, but yes. All right, shall we move on to some news?
Yeah.
News. Alex Meehan.
Hello.
Tell us about Slay the Spire, the board game.
Right, I'm in and also on the chopper. We're getting
in and on
the chopper. We're getting the hottest news here. Breaking news: Slay the Spire is becoming a board game. For those people who may not know, Slay the Spire is a very good video game. Have either of you played it?
I've played a lot of Slay the Spire. I love Slay the Spire.
Same.
I think it's probably better as a video game, but we'll get to that.
Whoa, hot takes already coming out, Matt Jarvis.
I have not played Slay the Spire. Sometimes I look at it and go, people like this, and then like, but it's to be honest, like I like my deck builders as card games.
Two contrasting opinions.
Well, so here's the thing, Matt Jarvis.
Oh.
I think if you were to play Slay the Spire, you would be like, that was a very good deck builder that should only exist as a video game.
That's an interesting take. I mean, I've played like virtual card games and been like, this is fun, but I think because I play a lot of card games because of my job, often when I'm looking at video games, I just want something that is very distinctly different. But I'm always intrigued, so I'm kind of intrigued to see what they do with this, and I'll probably check it out at some point.
So there's not a huge amount of information about it available yet, other than the fact that it's a co-op game, which is very intriguing. So imagining how that's going to work with how Slay the Spire works, which you control different characters, and they have kind of different abilities, and they fight enemies with a deck of cards, and that deck of cards has different like actions they can take, like attacking or casting a spell or things like that, and your deck slowly grows the farther you get, and you can buy more cards from a merchant. And then if you die, you start at the beginning again, but you have some of the cards, you have access to some of the cards that you've acquired along the way. So I guess it's what the video game people call a roguelike. It's a very
disdain, Alex.
It's a very broad term that no one really quite knows what it means. Yeah, it's like one of those terms that you're like, okay, I suppose that sort of describes it, but
I think using the term roguelike is like saying rock music, isn't it? Like there's a lot of subgenres which makes it confusing.
This game is very different from Hades, and yet they're both roguelikes. So, but yeah, yes.
Sorry, I was just gonna say. I think the problem I have with this idea is that I think if you were to like one-to-one map the video game into a card game, it would be an absolute nightmare to play, because there's like you can upgrade your cards. There's like a huge array of cards that you can pick from. Each player has their own separate mechanics, which are represented by not only like the effects on your cards, but also passive effects. You've also got artifacts which will have passive effects that you collect, and it's all randomized, and there's loads of different enemies, and they all have like 100 hit points, and like there's loads of maps involved. But all of that is abstracted by the fact that it's a video game, so it all happens in like, you know, microseconds. Whereas I think if they try and be too faithful to themselves, they might end up with a really clunky board game. So they are fundamentally going to have to change a lot of things, I think, and that will be where I sort of go, okay, why am I not just playing Slay the Spire?
So, yes, Mr. Jarvis?
I was going to say, I think this is always the thing with video game board games, right? It's like, do you go with the spirit or the letter? Because, like, if you just go with the spirit, that's fine. Like, if you get a bit of that flavour, it kind of adds to that world or gives you a kind of different input. You take a little element. But the worst like video game board games are the ones that, like you say, Wills, are just like they're trying to run code, but it's you, a human, trying to add up numbers that are crunched in the background on a bit of paper, and it's not fun, basically.
Yeah, well, I think digital card games are quite a big thing now, and like you know, it all sort of started in the mainstream of Hearthstone, right? And if you were to then make Hearthstone into a physical card game, it would suck ass, because it would just be like so much maths and so many physical elements that you would need to make all of the fun things that people enjoy about Hearthstone work. Like the fact that you could just copy and paste cards and like random numbers will get generated instantly and all that kind of stuff. It's a game that was like, what if we took the bones of, you know, trading card games or deck builders or whatever, and then did things that you are physically unable to do on a tabletop. So to then go back again and try and take the spirit of that and put it back on a table, I think would be really difficult. So I am cautiously unoptimistic. Pessimistic, that's the one.
Well,
but we'll see what happens,
If you think about it, like tabletop, as long as you accept that it's a different medium, then there's no reason why it wouldn't be good if they actually accepted that and made something that works with that. So, like, I'm of the opinion that Slay the Spire is great, and it works really well because, all those elements of upgrading cards, you know, the removing hit points, whatever, are done for you by a digital system. But, you know, I guess there's an element of the fact that, one, they're working with a tabletop publisher who hasn't done an awful lot. Contention Games have released one game called Imperium, the Contention, which is like an epic sci-fi board game. So something that's quite a bit different. But they are working with Megacrit, so the developers behind the video game. And Megacrit, you know, they obviously took inspiration from deck builders to make this game. So I'm sure they have some understanding of, you know, how that works on a tabletop. So the fact that they've not just, from what I know, they've not just handed it to Contention Games and said, there you go, have the license, like, make this. You know, obviously, I'm not confirming anything because I don't know specifically how involved they are, but, I mean, their name's on the front of the box at least. They're not just, like, going, here you go, like, have the license, whatever. So again, I am with you in the sense that I don't want them to just try and make a carbon copy of the video game, because they're just not going to be able to do that, and that's not the point of tabletop. But if they make a version that has the spirit of the video game, like the idea of going up a spire and facing, different enemies, and, if they, maybe they would do something with, accessing new cards every time you play, a little bit like a legacy game, maybe. I think that would be interesting. Like, you could upgrade cards by literally sticking on stickers on top of the cards. Like, they could potentially do something like that. Again, no idea whether they're going to, because there's no details. But, hey, if you're listening to this, Contention Games, we're giving you some ideas, although you've probably already made it.
Yeah, it reminds me of when we previewed the Divinity original symbol game.
Which was alright.
It was fine. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was like I think they did a very good job and were very clever in the way that they made a Divinity game into a tabletop game. But by doing that, they have, by design, made something that's inferior to the original product. And it's like that's what I'm worried about. Because I'm sure there are very, very, very cool things that you could do with the ideas and like Matt says, the spirit of Slay the Spire. I'm worried that they'll just make Slay the Spire and it won't be very good.
Yeah.
Or it'll be fine, but it just won't be Slay the Spire. But there we go. Yeah, I am a massive pessimist, so there we go.
We shall see.
Yeah.
Do we have a date on when it's coming out, man?
There's a Kickstarter is coming this year, so I don't know when that is. Stop asking me. Don't contact me. I don't know.
Yeah, Matt, God.
I'm sorry.
It wasn't to Matt specifically. It was just in general.
No, it's fine. Let's move on to this story, also by one Alex Meehan, about Battlestar Galactica Starship Battles.
Yeah. I'm flying off on Chopper, and we're going up to space now.
Wow.
Yeah. Whoa. Okay. So, Battlestar Galactica Starship Battles. Oof, that's a mouthful. Is a miniatures game which was made by Ares Games, who have they done
War of the Ring?
Yeah, they
published
did
War of the Ring. Funnily enough.
Oh wow.
Funnily enough, yeah. All paths lead back to Lord of the Rings. So they're the publisher behind this miniatures game, which is based on the television series from the 2000s and also includes the original one from the 70s settings, because why not? But unfortunately for fans, the game is no longer receiving any support because the license has just run out. So Ares Games have just said, we had some disagreements with Universal Brand Development, which owns the license, and so they just let it, fly off like ashes in the wind, poetically speaking. And so there were 2 expansions in the pipeline, Faster Than Light and an additional counter set, which are now being released as free to download PDFs. So there will be no longer any, there won't be any products released for the miniatures game. They are selling existing sets until June 30th. So if people want to buy any existing sets, they can do so until then. Other than that, sad times, I guess. I've not played it, so...
It's a shame. I reviewed it when it came out, and it's X-Wing in a lot of ways, but the thing that it did that was really interesting is it had real physics to it. So you could boost in a direction and then turn your ship, but you would continue to drift because of the momentum. So you could do you could boost, flip 180, and then shoot as you were drifting backwards.
That's pretty sick.
Which X-Wing didn't have. So that was kind of its real kind of selling point that made it stand out. Because I'm not like a huge Battlestar Galactica fan. I don't dislike it, I just have never really watched a lot of it. So when I was reviewing it, that was the thing that was really interesting. But the issues I had with it at the time were just that It was a little bit fiddly. It was quite expensive for what it was, it's not dissimilar to X-Wing, but and a lot of the components beyond the ships themselves, which like X-Wing were pre-painted and came on spinning bases, were just not very good. So the gameplay itself was really interesting. So it's kind of a shame to see interesting ideas, I guess, not pan out in a game that presumably didn't really find an audience. Because it did manage to do something different, at least. It kind of had a weight to it.
I think you just hope that they take that game system and just apply it to like something else. If the license itself, because again, I'm not a Battlestar Galactica fan, but it certainly has its fans. From what I understand, though, the thing that draws people to it are, is the tension between the characters, or, is that person a Cylon? I don't think you get that from, dogfighting space battles.
Yeah, but they covered that in the board game, right? It's like...
Yeah, exactly.
Although the board game you also can't buy. So.
Yeah, a game you also can't buy.
Yeah.
But like that I understand, but maybe they could just take the system and apply it to like an original IP that they don't have to get the license for. Or some other science fiction.
I feel like that would also be a bad idea, because I think part of the reason why I've literally only just heard of this is it is just going to seem like a sort of knockoff X-Wing to a lot of people.
Yeah,
and it's like, if you were choosing one, if you were really into space dogfighting, even if you were a massive Battlestar Galactica fan, you also have to have a lot of other friends who are willing to do that kind of thing and like Battlestar Galactica. And it's way easier to just like find people who already play X-Wing. You can go to many clubs and like X-Wing's already there. And it's also just, has a bigger publisher behind it to support it. Probably like a bigger range of stuff to play with and stuff.
It is Fantasy Flight, so it's always a risk as to whether...
with the dice roll, whether they'll shut it down.
Are they going to bother supporting
it? But I'm
it?
pretty sure X-Wing does relatively well for them, right? So
I
couldn't imagine they would just shut it down.
Yeah, it's worth saying that, so Ares, who published this, did Wings of War, or Wings of Glory, which came before X-Wing and is basically that, but with historical things. So I can see why they were trying to get in on the sci-fi side, but I do think if they couldn't make it work with... I mean, Battlestar Galactica isn't Star Wars or Star Trek, but it's a name.
Yeah.
Like, if they can't make it work with some kind of extra boost, maybe it's just not going to work out for them, which is a shame, because there were interesting ideas here. Like I say, just didn't have the momentum, ironically.
Oh, whoa!
He's back.
Bada boo! Wow! Hooey!
All right, Alex, me and another one from you.
Next.
Speaking of licensed games, tell us of the Dark Crystal RPG.
Wow,
and speaking of games that you've DM'd on the channel,
Well, Chopper, I don't know what world we're in right now. This is weird. The Dark Crystal, which is like a film from the 1982, I believe, directed by the beloved Jim Henson and Frank Oz. It was like a dark fantasy film. I've not actually seen it. I want to. I've just not gotten around to watching it. But at the time, it wasn't hugely popular, and it's become a bit of a cult classic. But it did receive a Netflix series, which lasted for a season and then was cancelled.
I was going to say, this
is video game as well.
Yeah, this is weird timing because they just cancelled the reboot. So it feels like, okay, this is following that, but maybe this was in the works before, and it's like, well, we've done the work.
Maybe they were just like, oh, do you know what? Create your own bloody stories. We can't be bothered anymore.
Mate, like Netflix are like Fantasy Flight. They'll just like cut the cord of anything. They're like, right, okay, this one's done. Let's just throw it in the garbage. But enough of that. This is a adventure game, the Dark Crystal adventure game, which is coming from the same creators behind the Labyrinth adventure game, which we have played, Mr. Whelan.
Mm-hmm. We have.
You and Johnny and I, we did a Let's Play of, and it was fun.
Yeah, it was very cute, and it was a good good game for like sort of younger audiences getting into RPGs, I think, which is ironic because it's based on a film from the 80s, but like it's I think it's a good one for sort of like maybe, you know, older RPG players to play with their kids or something like that. And it's really, really sort of easy system to get hold of. You only need like 1d6 or something like that, and it's all sort of generated for you in the book. So
is this the one that had like a slot to put the die in the book?
Yeah, it's really pretty as well. It's a lovely book. Nice thing to have on the shelf as well.
Yeah, the book is really nice, and it kind of has that like story book feel to it that I think really worked with Labyrinth. But I know Labyrinth because I don't really know Dark Crystal, but I suppose it makes sense as like a stepping off point. Like, you know, Dark Crystal is also made by Jim Henson, also has puppets, also fantasy. So it's going to be similar to the Labyrinth adventure game in that you know, one person takes a role of a GM and guides the other players through, you know, various scenarios in the book. And there will also be tools to allow the GM to kind of make their own stories in the same world if they want to. There aren't a huge amount of details other than that. There's going to be like a massive 200-page campaign involved, and there's not a release date for it yet, but there is a picture of it and it looks nice.
Did Labyrinth let you, because that was kind of like you say, it was an adventure story, but it let you do custom sessions, right?
Sort of. From what I remember, there were like, you know, tools that were like, oh, here are some of the NPCs that you can make, and like for the playthrough we did, I made my own stuff along with it, just because of the nature of doing a playthrough of it, because otherwise, you know, it'd be quite extended, but also because I wanted to, because it was fun. But the thing is, it wasn't really against that either. It's not like the game was like, you have to play it like this. It was more like, you know, this is the system, but you can kind of play around with it however you like. It is in that vein of rules light RPGs. In the sense that it's not really like, this is exactly how you're meant to do it. It's more like, this is a guideline, but you know, go to a swamp and see a snail lady if you want. That's exactly what it says.
It was kind of like you went through like different sort of chapters, I guess, which were in different parts of this little world, and then you always had a kind of rough similar story where you're always ending up with the Goblin King or whatever, which one you're going to choose. But then it was kind of just like, you know, find a page in this section, play it through, and then jump to another page. So it was almost like a little sort of procedurally generated kind of dungeon for you, which is quite cool. I think it was quite a nice little system. Yeah.
So if you're a fan of the Dark Crystal, or you just like rules light RPG books, keep an eye on it whenever it comes, I suppose.
Keep those peepers peeped.
Exactly.
Right. I'm going to sneak in one quick last one here.
Oh, Matt Jarvis, so sneaky.
There's a game called Embryo Machine.
I hate that.
You've got to say it. You've got to say it.
Embryo Machine is the name of this game. It's actually a Japanese game that came out in 2018. It's about mecha, so big old robots, similar to like Gundam or Evangelion, but it's now seeing an English translation and localization, courtesy of Lion Wing, who previously they have brought across some other bits. Kradia Wild Hunt Festival, which I think was kind of like Final Fantasy and Monster Hunter-esque. And Gun and Gun.
Oh yeah,
which I think we covered previously.
Gun and Gun.
But yes, Embryo Machine, which is just not. It's not.
Every time, whenever
it's just not
listeners,
a good name.
Whenever Matt Jarvis sent me a message about this today, this game, every time he wrote the words Embryo Machine afterwards, he'd do a little bracket. And in the bracket, a sad face would be in there. Every time he wrote it.
It's not nice to say. It's not nice to read.
It's gross,
Yeah, but the game itself sounds kind of interesting. So it's like a skirmish board game in which you pilot the titular EMs. And you draft cards to equip them with different weapons and armor and abilities. And then you take to the battlefield, which is a gridded board. And it is said to be very tactical, so there's elements of terrain affecting your traits. You can take cover behind things. You can flank your opponents because the standees that represent the EMs have different facings. And you can play either free-for-all with up to 6 people or in teams. But it sounds kind of interesting. It's kind of like a... like it's said to be very fast-playing because everybody's movement and actions happen simultaneously. So you're trying to, similar to something I guess like Robo Rally, you're trying to predict where your opponents might move and aim your attacks there, while also avoiding attacks that might come your way and not suddenly step into them. So like the gameplay sounds really interesting if it's as fast as it kind of makes itself out to be, while also having this kind of tactical edge. That sounds really interesting. It just has a terrible name.
Yeah.
It's not an appealing name in any way.
No.
And,
I mean, maybe it was... I don't know what the translation is like. Maybe that's the fault. I can't imagine... I don't know why you would willingly choose to to call it this for any other reason other than maybe trying to directly translate it as much as possible.
Yeah, I believe the original one was called Embryo Machine as well.
Well, there you go.
But I don't know for sure. So it's seeing a Kickstarter next month, so that's February. But there's no kind of confirmation of when it might be out after that. Also, the original game I think has one expansion out that came out in 2019 and has an expansion coming out this year. But it hasn't been confirmed whether those will be translated as well. I imagine they'll see how this kind of base game does. It comes with, I think, 9 different mechs, and then you outfit them with kind of your different bits and bobs. It seems like there's a good amount of variety and kind of customization.
Get a microwave in there, get a popcorn machine.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, you want your mech to be comfy. You want to have...
Bring along your fatherly issues.
Got to keep that embryo comfortable.
God, Wheels.
I will say, whilst I'm not really a big mecha fan, I am excited to see more Japanese games being sort of made available in other markets because it's a huge place for game design. So it's a really, really cool thing to be able to actually play some of those games in your native language, depending on where you're listening to this from. Hopefully someone that speaks English, because otherwise this might be difficult to understand.
I mean, Matt Jarvis, help me with this.
Robot in disguise.
What was that game we played last year that we really liked? That Bullet,
yes.
Yeah.
Which I backed on Kickstarter, disclaimer.
Did that have a Japanese developer?
Don't believe so. I think Bullet was just very anime inspired.
Matt Jarvis, Embryo Machine.
You're the worst. Why don't, for example, Shadowhunters, one of my favourite games.
Yeah, so this is from I believe originally from the studio that made Shadowhunters.
Whoa!
The Japanese studio, whose name Kuseic. I believe they made Shadowhunters. I'll just interject, sorry.
I'm sold, because I love that game. So I'm glad that was translated over. So I'm all for it, frankly. Yeah, let's get those games translated.
Yeah, I mean mechs are popular for a reason. They are big and stompy, and it's fun to play as them.
Reasons we like mechs: big, stompy.
Yeah, well, that's kind of it, right? They often have a cool look. I think there have been some really good mech games. There have been some not so good ones. There have been things like Starship Samurai, I think, was one that kind of just took that the visual kind of influences, and it was just kind of fine. The last one I remember being of kind of a lot of interest was the Giant Killer Robots, GKR Heavy Hitters, which was from Weta Workshop. Yeah, which came in a box that was about the size of my coffee table, because it had pre-painted massive things and 3D buildings that you could turn to rubble. But that had like a really strong like aesthetic and idea behind its world, where it was all these kind of corporations and you could spray buildings with advertising as you destroyed them, which was quite funny. So yeah, mech games, they're good. So hopefully this will be a good one, despite having a horrible name. Yes. All right, let's do some emails, shall we, before we close out this podcast, the first of 2021.
Got all sorts of questions just waiting to be hatched, like little embryos.
No, stop it, Will! Stop it!
To hatch this embryo, let's turn over to our own embryo machine, Michael Whelan Wills.
Matt, how do people reach us to send us emails?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can email podcast@dicebreaker.com. Gosh, it's been a few weeks since I last recorded a podcast. Thanks for reminding me.
That's all right.
Or you can find us at Join Dicebreaker on Twitter. Or you can just find us at dicebreaker.com or youtube.com/dicebreaker. Get in touch. We want to hear from you, not about your embryo machines.
No!
Wills, would you like to read this one from Jonathan, please?
From Jonathan, who says, "Hey guys, I've been GMing quite a few RPGs this year over Discord. Mostly stuff like D&D, Lasers and Feelings, and Quest. And the tone has been generally quite light-hearted and comedic. Recently, I've picked up the Alien RPG, and I love it, but I was wondering if you had any advice on creating more of a horror tone as a GM. Love the show, Jonathan." Thanks very much for your question, Jonathan. I mean, I guess we're uniquely placed to answer this because we ran the Alien RPG on youtube.com/Dicebreaker, our original YouTube channel full of fantastic videos featuring these lovely faces, and maybe even this video that you're watching right now if you're watching it there. So make sure you hit subscribe and click the bell icon and all that
Wait,
stuff.
are we ending the video? This sounds like the end to the video.
I had to get it out. It's been a long time, Matt. So yeah, Alien is a very cool RPG, which we won't go too into because I think we talked about it a few times on the podcast already. But it is set in Ridley Scott's Alien universe. You are playing sort of Survivor-style characters who are having to deal with aliens and androids and all that nonsense. Not nonsense. Oh my god.
I'm like the worst older brother right now.
Anyway,
we won't put that as the episode title.
It was with an SE. I just want to point out. Anyway, horror is an interesting thing, and I think we all really love horror RPGs. So I think we'll all have a lot to say about this. For me, it's all about not playing your hand too early with a horror RPG. I think a lot of the time when I run stuff, you won't see the actual thing that is going to murder you for a very, very long time. A lot of it is in the environment that you're describing and just that general feeling of uneasiness and just being in a space where you know something bad has happened, but you can't quite put your finger on what has happened. Because we had this kind of unique problem where we were running the Alien RPG where everyone knows what a xenomorph is and everyone knows what a facehugger is and all that kind of stuff. So if you just go, oh, there's a big black monster who you've never seen before, and everyone's like, oh, I wonder what that is. So you have to be a lot more mysterious and a lot more sort of teasing with the way that things work, because even if people know every single monster in the Alien universe, they don't know what they're coming up against, and they don't know what kind of danger they're in, and they don't know how many things they're coming up against, all that kind of stuff. So leaning into the unknown is a big part of GMing horror, I think. But I'll hand over to my esteemed colleagues.
Which one? Quick.
Ian's trying to find one.
Well, I think, like, generally horror RPGs, I find they require like careful handling, because I think it's very easy to end up just dispelling the atmosphere, and as soon as you lose that, like Will said, like that's such a big part of the horror RPGs, or the appeal of horror RPGs. I think combat is particularly hard to manage, so I think the Alien RPG actually handles it quite well in that it doesn't have a super complex combat system because it's not really designed for that. It's designed for you to very rarely come into contact with things. And if you do, they're going to really hurt you. Call of Cthulhu does similar things. I think that is generally the vibe, is make sure your group kind of knows what the score is going in, because if they're expecting to beat up a load of Gribblies and, kind of run around and...
No, come on, let's start things back here. Please explain Gribblies to me.
Gribblies, they're the kind of monsters that go...
kind of Muppets you like.
That kind of monster, they look like they've just crawled out of a sewer grate, and they're kind of like, they're sticky to the touch.
That's me.
That's not the grossest thing.
That's me, the embryo machine.
But I think that's the thing, is you need everyone to commit, because as soon as somebody, decides that they don't want to creep quietly anymore, that can ruin it for everyone else. And that's fine. Like, some groups just won't want that. But you need to have everyone on the same page and to kind of respect what vibe the GM or other players are going for. Because if they see something like, if they see the xenomorph and then they immediately run up and try to bat it with a plank of wood, it's really hard to write your way out of that as a GM without just killing the entire party if you want to maintain kind of the level of dread and suspense.
There's definitely a difference between like horror as a genre and horror as an aesthetic. I think you want to find out very early on which of those two you're aiming
that's a really
towards.
good way of putting it. Yeah.
I mean, I would say that the Alien RPG is useful in that fact because it's very much, from what I know, an RPG based on the first film, on Alien. So it's very much leaning into this is horror as a genre. Like, you are characters that are scrubs. If you go up against a xenomorph, you will die. Like, your characters are meant to be weak, are meant to be vulnerable, and they're not meant to be, going hoorah and running at the enemy. So as long as you lay those things out very clearly for your players beforehand, then I think they're going to be on the same page. And if they're not on the same page by that point, frankly, I don't know what else you could have done.
You are fully allowed to murder them all at that point. You've given them their warning.
Yeah, I'm someone who really likes horror RPGs. So my experience of running them, and I've actually on a whole run more horror RPGs than other genres, is number one, soundtrack. Soundtrack is so important. Please make a soundtrack. There's loads of free music on YouTube. There are even soundtracks people have made on Spotify, or they vary greatly in quality.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you end up with kooky music, and you're like, well, this isn't very effective.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning into my mixtape. We're going to get real spooky right now.
DJ Spook.
I think dark ambient is the genre that you're looking for.
Yeah, so I've made a lot of soundtracks using video game music because it's actually very effective in that regard, because they're built to, one, loop, and two, to create atmosphere. So, like, I just think soundtracks are so effective with making horror. They make such a difference. And, like, have different tracks for different situations. So, like, if people are running away from something, have, like, a chase track. Or if they're just searching for something, have, like, a mysterious, like, oh, it's hinting at danger, but you're not, like, fully, in trouble yet. And, like, build that around. So pacing is incredibly important in making a horror RPG campaign. So like Will said, don't just, like, fling a monster at them straight away. Like, start off with a fairly normal situation, like, we're all on ground zero, but then, like, gradually feed in, like, a feeling of something's not quite right here. Like, one of these NPCs is acting oddly, like, this environment, there's something watching us, or there's something not right about us. And definitely use your powers as a GM describing things to, like, build that sense of unease. It's all about, like, the building of tension and then the release of that tension. So, like, knowing when is the best moment to, like, have my monster or monsters, whatever it is, like, come out, like, or maybe I should have a lesser sort of danger, like, just to get, like, their hackles raised up. So, and, like, Alien RPG is a good one for that, because, the mechanics, like any good horror RPG, the mechanics feed into building atmosphere. Like, any good horror RPG worth its salt, like, does that. There you go.
Yeah, if you're playing in person as well, I think setting a good ambience just in the room. Like, one thing that makes 10 Candles such a great RPG is that it physically forces you to play in the dark. And you're playing by candlelight, and just immediately the fact that you physically, as a human being, could breathe a little bit too heavily and blow out the candle and risk, like, losing something in the game world immediately puts everyone on edge. Which, if that's the kind of vibe that you're trying to pull out, and you want people to feel a little bit anxious and a little bit, oh my god, what's going to happen? Like, allowing them to feel that in both regards is really powerful, I think.
Yeah, it's also worth saying that I think horror RPG in the horror genre in general is sometimes more prone to people delving into like problematic or uncomfortable topics, because you're essentially going for shock tactics, or so just make sure your players are comfortable. Like, use the X card, use like lines and veils.
Yeah.
Like, set out the boundaries first. Like, having horror doesn't mean that you need to be, genuinely unpleasant or to genuinely unsettle people or make them feel uncomfortable. No. So just respect your players and they'll respect you back, and ultimately the atmosphere will be better for it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Every campaign I've made, I've always you don't need those shock tactics, those really unpleasant aspects to make something scary. If you build the right atmosphere, it will be scary. Or thereabouts.
All right. Yeah. Alex Meehan, would you like to read this one from Jack?
From Jack. Jack says, if you could have anyone from history to be part of your ideal RPG group, who would you pick, and what kind of character do you think they would make?
Anyone from history?
History.
Because I feel like sometimes we get asked this question about celebrities, but I feel like if you're going for history, you gotta go back, right?
I would pick Cao Cao from the Three Kingdoms period of China, who is like a cunning, conniving mastermind general, because I think he would make some very interesting sort of rogue characters. There's like a phrase in Chinese that obviously I don't know the original text for, but it's kind of like their version of speak of the devil and he will appear, where it's like by the time that you've uttered Cao Cao's name, his cavalry have already arrived or something like that. So I think he would be a really cool character to run an RPG for.
See, I would take like Dante, and I would want him to be GM.
The GM, yeah.
Yeah, just like give us the Divine Comedy, but as a 17-part campaign, or probably like 1,700 part.
That would
campaign.
be amazing, to be honest.
Yeah.
Odysseus would also be an interesting pick for that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Who would I pick? Probably someone maybe Mary Wollstonecraft, because she was a woman who did a lot of thinking during a time when women weren't really supposed to. She kind of didn't really care, and just wrote an entire book about why she doesn't care and why other women shouldn't care. And so I think she would just have the ability to make a character that had that similar kind of vibe of not disruptive in terms of I'm going to deliberately mess this story up because I want to. More in the case of I'm going to make a character who speaks their mind, and regardless of potential pressures or constraints or whatever. And she was a smart woman, and I want smart people in my RPG group.
To flip it on its head, what figure from history would you absolutely not want at your table? Because I think Socrates would be the kind of guy who would argue that the Thaco system is mathematically superior or something.
Yeah, Socrates or any of the ancient philosophers. They're all just going to be rules pedants, aren't they?
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
That's not going to be any fun.
Yeah, I would say Clement Attlee, because Clement Attlee was a great prime minister. He literally created the NHS. He made the welfare state. He was a socialist. Perhaps one of the last socialist politicians we've ever had in a real, the UK has ever had in a real state of power. But he was described as being an incredibly boring man. I think someone said he had the personality of a gerbil or something. And he was a brilliant politician in terms of bringing in social reforms, but as a personality, whenever a news station or whatever would like ask for comment, he would just say no comment. He would just drive off in his little car. And you know,
I respect that.
I respected the man, but like as someone creating like an engaging character, probably not him. Yeah.
Yeah. See, yeah, like Jack Kerouac or why did I forget James Joyce? Like just self-indulgent. Like they would spend 20 minutes describing what their character's doing, think it was the most important thing in the world.
Yeah,
like they've both written like 20,000 words as backstory to their character's like ear tattoo.
Lord Byron.
See, I was actually after.
I would rather have Byron than Shelley. Shelley can take a nosedive as far as I'm concerned.
I was going to say that Mary Shelley, I wish I'd changed after you said Mary Wollstonecraft, I was thinking about Mary for some reason.
Mary
Shelley would be incredible.
Yeah.
She would be
Mary
incredible running it.
Yeah, she would be amazing. Her husband, not so much.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was a dweeb, a massive dweeb. All he did was moan, and he was married to an amazing woman, and all he could was moan about the women that wouldn't love him. Yeah. Like, I have no time. I have no time for Percy Shelley. Just whines.
Or the Brontes. We had a fantastic piece on the website last year. Jodie McGregor wrote it about how the Brontes kind of were role playing in their own world. So it would have been amazing to play with them and kind of visit their world. But yeah, thank you for your question. That was an interesting one.
That was a good one.
From Kirsty. Hi, Dicebreaker. I hope you're having a good festive time. Well, thank you, Kirsty. We hope you had a good end to the year. My family and I have really enjoyed playing The Crew over this weird year. Are there any similar trick-taking games you could recommend while we wait for the sequel game? Kirsty.
Oh, there is... is it the Fox
in the Forest?
Fox in the Forest is the first one that came to
Forest.
mind. It's so good. It's very good.
It's very, very good. It is.
I still haven't tried it, but I never stop hearing people recommend it.
It is a 2-player game. It's like Whisk, but like cards have certain abilities and powers, and it is exactly the kind of game where you stick on some music, you have a drink, and you just play that for and then before you know it, it's been like an hour of playing Fox in the Forest. But you can also play it for just 15 minutes or something. It's a really good filler game.
There's a competitive game it's kind of trick-takey, but sort of not as well, called Red 7, which I don't know if you've played it, where it's like you have a hand of cards and they range from 1 to 7 in 7 different colours. And each like the numerical value and the color values have like a hierarchy. So obviously 7 is better than 1, and 2 and 3, 3 is better than 2, etc. But like red is the strongest color, then orange, then yellow, like that kind of thing. And the way it works is there is like a rule card in the center, because every card, depending on what color it has, also has like a rule at the bottom. So it could be like Red 7, the highest card wins, or it could be the person with the most cards that have a value under 4 or whatever. So on your turn, you just have to be winning by the end of your turn. So you can either play to your tableau in front of you and say, all right, well now I've just put down a card that's higher the value than yours, so I win now. Or you can physically change the rule of the game, which is really, really weird, because there's also, once you get used to it, the proper rules, but depending on what cards you place down, it will have an effect. So you have this weird puzzle where you're just like, okay, I can put down a 7, but I'll be forced to get rid of something else, or I'll put down a 3, which will allow me to put down another card, but then I need to change the rule to do this, and it's really good. It's a lot of fun.
I was actually trying to think of more, but I'm struggling. I don't think No Thanks doesn't really fall under it, does it? Because it doesn't really have trumps or...
Yeah,
no.
It's just... Red 7 was a bit of a stretch, to be fair. I think I don't play a whole lot of trick-taking games.
There's a card game, I suspect it's not actually called... It's probably got 7 different names, just card games that have existed for God knows how long. But there's this card game that my family and I play called Old Maid, which I think has like I said, 5 different names. So it's just set of playing cards, you deal them out equally, and then hearts are worth points, which you don't want. You want to have the fewest points possible, and then the Queen of Spades is worth 13 points. So you just play like a series of trick-taking rounds, and then if you win hearts, so if you win like the trick with hearts in them, you get those hearts, which is something you don't want. So it's very much like a game where it's all about testing, like, okay, how many diamonds do you think people have? How many like clubs do you think people have? And like playing a certain suits and just testing, okay, like, because once you run out of a suit, you can play any card you like, which is when people start, throwing out hearts and the Queen of Spades and everything. So it's a game that's been passed down in my family for like years. So, yeah, it's probably called something else, maybe.
I think Old Maid is what it's called. There is a game, and I was just trying to search for it, and I can't find it at all. I remember there being a game that was based on it relatively recently, but I now can't find it anywhere.
Oh, it's a mystery.
Yeah, but yeah, trick-taking games are one of those things. I feel like we're almost due a resurgence. I mean, maybe we'll see it after The Crew, because The Crew, has been such a success that maybe we'll see folks looking at that. But I think the fact The Crew works because it combines it with other factors, like the inability to communicate. And
I feel like the biggest thing with trick-taking games that kind of stops people playing them is that the concept of how you play a trick-taking game is actually really kind of difficult to describe. Because I remember playing like a couple of trick-taking games at like a convention once, and you'd always have the person who's describing the game, and they'd be like, okay, do you know what trick-taking is? And whenever someone said no, they'd go, okay.
Yeah, because you're like, a lot of the time, so with Old Maid, the thing that makes that complicated is that a lot of the time you don't want to win the tricks. That's the point. Like, because then whoever wins the trick then has to play the next card, like, first. It's always better when you're following. So, like, that concept of you don't want to win, like, that round, it's confusing because it goes against the natural, like, inclination of, I want to win, like...
Yeah, trick-taking games are sort of a strange one, but yeah, maybe we will see a new resurgence.
Yeah,
who knows?
I'm interested about that new Crew to see whether or how different it is. Whether it's just kind of new missions with a similar vibe, or whether they...
Quest for Planet 10.
What's it called? It's called something underwater.
Oh, it's a deep sea one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember saying that they'd done it specifically to upset Johnny because there's probably whales in it.
Probably whales in it. Yeah.
All right, Wills, would you like to read this last one from Sordros, please?
Yeah. Hello, Dicebreaker. Do you think the six-sided die is overused? There are some games I feel where only having 6 sides limited what they could do with the game. Do you think this is more toward game design or balance? Maybe the statistics probability is not as easily accessible for the more multi-sided dice. From Sordros. Thank you for the question. We actually spoke about dice on a previous podcast and sort of like what our favourite one was. And I think D6, probably the reason that they're so well used in a lot of games is, one, they're incredibly accessible. Like you can get if you've ever owned a crap board game, it's probably got a D6 in it. Like you'll find a D6 somewhere. They're also, as you said in the question, Sordros, there's not that many results on a D6, which makes it a little bit easier to predict. But also just the fact that the D6 is probably the most common die because it fell into that kind of area. There's actually an interesting thing with dice where, like, if you buy a D6, they're always really well weighted, whereas with other dice, it's kind of like it's just based on luck whether or not you're going to get a die that actually sort of rolls really well. The D6 is the only one that factories really put any effort into actually making sure that it's properly weighted. Because a lot of, like, if you buy a D20, it's just sort of like, made in a factory without all that much care to it, I think. Whereas there's kind of like an approved, like, dimension for the D6. It's kind of been refined very well. It's kind of like, it's like playing cards. It's one of those things that's so accessible to everyone that it's a good thing to use for game design, I think. But it is sort of like, I guess, like if a lot of people use the same thing, it can get tiring after a while, right? Which is probably the thing you're feeling with it. But there's a lot of ways you can use dice. I think it's more of an interesting question to me, like how you use them. Yeah, exactly.
The dice
where it's
itself.
like, are you just rolling it and seeing what the result is, or are you using it like a counter? Are you rolling like multiple dice and taking the best result, like Blaze in the Dark or that kind of thing? But yeah, I really like D8s personally. I think they're really nice.
Oh, Matt.
I don't care for the D8 wheels.
I like D8s as well, Wills, don't worry.
D8 feels like
give
a
you the cool pyramid
style.
of a D4 without the non-rollability of a D4.
D4s suck universally. Like,
D4s are just terrible.
D4. Yeah.
D4s are good counters.
It's a Lego brick.
But never roll them.
No.
It's a terrible thing to roll.
Comet
is still... I'm still amazed by Comet using D4s as a pyramid. It blew my mind.
Yeah, I think D6s, they're also... One of the really nice things about them is they're, like you say, they're accessible because of mass production and so on, but they're also visually very accessible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, so often you have dice that have a greater number of sides, but because they're having to put the numbers rather than pips, they can just become illegible. And it just is like cheap dice that you can't read just cause frustration. And there's just something very immediate about, you can look at a D6 and almost straight away you can be like, that's a 4 because it's 1 in each corner, or that's a 3 because it's a diagonal slash. Like it's just a very quick thing rather than squinting at a D20 and trying to work it out.
It's a nice marrying of symbols which make them easy to read, but also they're symbols that are made out of the amount of value they have, right? So it's a slash, but also it's 3 dots, so you can count or you can recognize the symbol. Also, visually impaired people can just feel the amount on there as well, which is huge. So like they are super accessible in more ways than one, which I think is why they're so universal.
Yeah, I think pretty much echoing what they've said. Like, it's got the accessibility, but it rolls far better than a D4. So you get the most of both worlds.
Yeah.
So, like, RPGs are there to use different dice. Like, that's fine. Like, like, I think it's... Sometimes I think some RPGs just pick certain dice just because they want to try and do something different, which is fine. Like, I suppose trying to stand out and being unique in some way. And also, like, you think about it, RPGs, the scope of potential results in terms of what could happen is far greater than what you'd potentially get in a board game, in terms of like, from this to this, like this could happen, or etc. Whereas like board games don't work like that, so it makes more sense that they do use something like a D6, because it's more about the numbers itself rather than like a range like RPGs often do it. So yeah, D6s are alright in this house.
Yeah, there's something very satisfying as well, where there's a game, because some games go pure minimalism, it's like you have 1 or 2 dice, you roll them and that's all you get. But there's also something to be said for games where you gain dice through different traits or abilities, and then you have like 20 D6 and you're just lobbing it and just watching it rain onto the table.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the only reason people play Warhammer.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they get to roll 400 D6.
Yeah. D6 just has a really satisfying shape, feels great to roll, and it's accessible. That's why they use them.
I would also say, just to... because we were talking about you only use certain dice sometimes just because they're different. One thing that I do really love on a D10 is the fact that it's literally a percentage in tens of how likely you are to succeed. So you have to roll an 8 or lower on a D10, you have an 80% chance of success.
Yeah.
That is super readable statistics-wise, which is another really cool thing.
D10s are fine, D6s are fine, D8s are fine. The others...
Matt Jarvis is tweaking. What's your favourite die, Matt Jarvis?
I think like the D6 is very dependable, right? Like it's and you always have them. Like if you lose them, you'll always have one nearby. And I also like games that, because it's so recognisable, they can play. So like Betrayal at House on the Hill uses D6s, but it's blank 1 or 2 pips.
Yeah.
So it takes that familiar form factor. I've got to sound pretentious, don't I? It takes the familiar form factor and makes it, but it does. It feels different. It feels distinct to that game, but it's still something that you recognise straight away looking at it. I also like Root. Root doesn't use D6, but it uses custom D10s or D12s maybe, where they only go from 0 to 3.
Yeah,
and that's again, it's like it feels different and it feels fresh to that game, but it's still familiar enough. D20 I think is a little too fiddly. Like it's fine.
I just think D20s are so difficult to read in so many different ways. Like there's even just the fact that they've doubled the amount of numbers to a D10, it completely messes in my head when it comes to probabilities. The amount of like two-digit numbers that you have to cram onto sides means that they have to be really small and you can't read them as well. And it just like it gets cocked easy. Like I don't think they're very good dice.
I have just one thing to say. I hate D12s. That is all. I hate D12s. I hate D12s.
It's big.
I like them.
It's a big statement.
Yeah.
It's a big statement.
I can never find them. On my bag. I don't know whether I'm stupid or it's just D12's got a problem.
They do sort of feel like a smaller D20. That is.
Yeah, I think it's like you pick them up thinking it's a D10, and it's not. Like they're too easy to get confused. I think top tier is D6 and D10. Then, like, I don't know, everything else below that. Who cares?
You're treading dangerous
Matt
territory.
Just realised that you would have to say that D8s are good, and he immediately aborted.
D8s are fine. They're better than D4s. They're better than D20s. But they're just. I mean, what's the point of them? Just roll a D6 or roll a D10.
They look cool.
It's the in between. It's the in between die. Nobody needs it.
They look so cool.
Add 2 more sides or take away 2. You don't need 8. Come on. Be realistic. You're kidding yourself if you think you need 8 sides.
Imagining Matt Jarvis saying all of this to a D8, just like pointing at it, going, "Come on, add 2 sides or take it away."
I can tolerate it without respecting it.
Wow.
All right. Well, thank you for your questions. Or if you've got a question for the podcast, you can reach us at podcast@dicebreaker.com. Of course, you can find us on dicebreaker.com, at Join Dicebreaker on Twitter, or youtube.com/Dicebreaker. Speaking of which, Michael Whelan of the video team.
It's your judgment day.
Wheels.
Come on.
What have we got coming up?
Well, Matt, as you know, this has been a difficult week to fill because it's just me on the video team. So up in the air, really. But this will be out on Friday. So yesterday we would have done a live stream. Mm-hmm. What was on that live stream? Who knows? This weekend there will not be any Dungeon Breaker because we haven't recorded the next session. And I think are we going into a season break, right?
I believe we are going into a season break.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the week after, hopefully we'll have a brand new RPG system that we're playing through, which is very, very exciting. But for now, it's a lucky dip.
The wheels are spinning up, literally, I guess.
The wheels are spinning out of control.
We're getting back into the swing of things for 2021, but yes, we'll have some stuff on the way. So go and check out YouTube.
You'll just have to look at the channel every single day.
Yeah.
And then that seems like a perfectly normal thing to do.
Or if you've not watched any of the videos we've released over the holidays, catch up now, for goodness sake. Come on.
Loli
before somebody spoils it for you on Twitter.
Yeah, Loli's did a very good highlights reel of the first year and a bit of Dicebreaker. Good. I can't believe it, the first year and a bit. But we've done a lot, it turns out, in a year where there was a lot. We put out a lot of stuff. I mean, Dungeon Breaker only started about this time last year, which is
weird.
Wild. So yes, so go and check out that if you've missed anything, and of course there are more than enough videos.
Just press play and just let it go.
Yeah. Just treat yourself to a random video. Why not rewatch something?
Yeah.
And you can also find our picks for games of the year. It's worth saying because I don't know if we did a podcast on it, but there is a list video where we've each picked our favorite game of 2020.
Yeah, you can.
Mine's green.
Yours is green.
Yeah.
You can see me say root by accident.
Root, the game.
My game of the year is Scythe.
Meanwhile, on
Dicebreaker.com,
we have up already, as you read this, a piece where Jamie Taylor played Terraforming Mars with the executive director of the Mars Society, which is an organization dedicated to basically researching the possibility of humanity living on Mars, which is really interesting. It turns out that Terraforming Mars actually is surprisingly true to science in a lot of ways. Lucinda Offer found it, like, other than the fact you're competing with each other, which, humanity, but it turns out that it's pretty true to what we'll actually need to do if we plan on settling the Red Planet someday.
One step that Terraforming Mars doesn't really go into, which I think is going to be really important when we get to that part of society, is we might want to hire an art director.
Yeah.
Whoa!
Is that a scathing indictment on Terraforming Mars?
Yeah,
oh my goodness!
It's not a pretty game, but it's an efficient game.
I like the box cover. I think the box cover looks nice. I just not seen any of the components.
Yeah, the components, also the quality of the components. Let's hope that whatever kind of weird bubble things we're living in on Mars are made out of better stuff than the components of Terraforming Mars. Otherwise, we'll be finding ourselves drifting off into space or burning up or freezing or whatever happens on Mars. I'm not a scientist. What do I know?
Stop asking me. Stop sending me emails.
Stop sending your questions in about settling Mars. Yeah, and we'll also have some other stuff. The usual kind of lists, guides, articles, features. We'll be looking at some of the stuff coming up in 2021. Alex Meehan's already put together a couple of summaries, which you may have already read, but if you've not, you should go and check them out. Kind of some of the board games and tabletop RPGs coming up this year. Some exciting stuff in there. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see us playing some of it and writing about some of it in the very near future. But who could say, other than us? I'm telling you right now, it'll be here.
Yeah, we'll be here.
For this week, that is the Dicebreaker podcast. Thank you for being back, Michael Wills, Wheel and Wills.
Thank you for having me, Matthew Jarvis Embryo Machines.
Oh no, that's my
Oh God!
What's the secret word? Sleeper agent word.
Does that mean you're going into some sort of rampage where you're gonna go...
It's whatever I've been programmed to do by Big Board Game. I'm gonna write positively about First Martians, despite the fact that it's a terrible game and no one should play. Alex Meehan, thank you for being here as well.
Yeah, I'm bringing Chopper back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't sue us, please.
For Timberlake or
yeah, he listens.
Yeah, everyone does. But thank you for being here. It's good to be back in 2021. We will be back, of course, next Friday with more rambling about whatever's on our mind next week, I suppose, and maybe some board games and RPG stuff as well. But who knows? We will be back. Thank you for listening. We hope you're staying safe out there, whatever the situation may be. Stay safe, stay healthy, look after those around you. We'll be back. But for now, thank you for listening, and until we meet again, have a lovely day.
Bye.
Bye.